All right, guys. So history of the bones. Okay, so for this assignment, you're gonna learn how to understand what a forensic anthropologist does. You're gonna reconstruct 4 skeletons, determine the age, sex, and height of the skeletons, and determine the identities of each skeleton. So the scene. In a quiet camping area known as Crystal Lake, 4 complete human skeletons were found in the mud when the lake began to dry during a drought. Detectives checked the missing persons reports for people in the area and found that 4 people had disappeared from that area over the last 10 years. Oddly, the skeletons were almost completely intact due to being preserved in the clay at the bottom of the lake. So your task is going to be to reconstruct the remains and to determine which bone matches which missing person by cutting the bones from the page and pasting them in the correct formation. You're going to have each member of your team complete a single skeleton, 4 in total. So again, these are pretend missing persons. Okay, so our first missing person is Sarah. She is 18 years old, and her height is 153 centimeters, weight 115 pounds. Second missing person, Robert Downey, age 45, height 163 centimeters, weight 190 pounds. Okay, and then third missing person is Eva Longoria, age 55, height 168 centimeters, weight 140 centimeters. Name of the fourth missing person is Neil Baxter, age 32, height 181 centimeters, weight 210 pounds. Okay. So there's a slide, a couple of slides down, where it asks you to measure the bones or to estimate the height. I think they tell you the height of the person. No? Okay, they have you estimate the height of the person. So you're able to estimate the height of the person by looking at the femur, because the femur is 1/4 the height of the person. Okay? So you can tell who the taller person is from here. And then also, you're going to be able to identify who the 2 males are, right? Because the males have the longer pelvis and the 2 females have the wider pelvis. Okay? So wider is this way, right? Longer is this way. So you should be able to take it down to, okay, these 2 pelvises belong to males. Who is taller? Okay, it looks like Neil Baxter is taller than Robert Downey. So whoever has the larger femur of the males, okay, it's going to belong to Neil Baxter. Okay, and then when we look at the 2 females, remember the 2 females have the wider hips, right? So once you identify the 2 females, you're going to look at the femur that has the longer length, okay? Since we know that Eva Longoria is taller in height at 168 centimeters, okay? And we know that the femur is 1/4 the height of the person. The larger femur is going to belong to the larger femur that belongs to the female is going to belong to Eva. Okay, does that make sense, guys? All right, perfect. All right, guys. So for these skeletons, again, there's 4 skeletons. For some of my students, they were able to go ahead and create another presentation and then assemble it that way. But then some of my other students weren't able to do that. So you can try to open up create a new presentation that isn't under your student ID number to assemble it. If that still doesn't work, there are some worksheets that are around that have the 4 skeletons. You can try that way, or you can go ahead and just number the skeletons, okay? The biggest thing that I want you to take away from these skeletons, I personally didn't think it was that obvious by looking at the eyes and the nose at just the skeleton of just the 4 skeletons. But so what you really want to do, what you really want to focus on is looking at the pelvis and looking at the femur. Okay, so for the pelvis, we have a higher iliac crest, okay, and then we have a deeper pelvic cavity, okay. The pubic arch is very narrow. It looks like, a triangle, okay, so this is the pubic arch right here, and that's about 60 to 70 degrees. And we know it's a male pelvis because it's long, okay? It's long, and the pubic arch is kind of shaped like a triangle, okay? So that's how we know that it's a male pelvis. So when we look at a female pelvis, you'll notice that it's going to be wider, okay? And the pubic arch is actually going to be shaped like a parabola, okay? Not like a triangle. So that's how you can tell the difference between a male and a female. So again, this one, the easiest way to tell that it's a male pelvis is because it's longer and because it has a triangular shaped pubic arch. That's the easiest way to tell, okay? So for our second skeleton, guys, we see here that we have a higher iliac crest, okay? We have a deeper pelvic cavity. The pubic arch is 60 to 70 degrees. We know that it is a male pelvis. How do we know that? Because it is long. So remember, male pelvises are long, whereas female pelvises are wide. The second most obvious feature is the pubic arch, which is triangular in shape. Okay, it's very narrow, triangular in shape. Remember, female pubic arches are more like a parabola, and the width is wider for childbearing purposes. Okay, so everybody see that? We know that this is a male pelvis because it is long and because the pubic arch is triangular in shape. It's narrow. Okay. Okay, so now we're gonna look at a female pelvis, okay? So when we look at a female pelvis, so do you notice how it's wider? It's wider compared to the last 2 male ones? Okay, so it's wider, and you have an anterior superior iliac spine. The pubic arch looks like a parabola. It's 80 to 90 degrees, okay? And we have a shallow pelvic cavity, okay? And it is shorter in length. So again, the easiest way to tell that this is a female pelvis is because the hips, the pelvis is wider, okay? It's shorter in length, okay? And because the pubic arch is shaped like a parabola, okay? Remember the first two male pelvises that we looked at, it was longer, right, in length, and then the pubic arch area was shaped more like a triangle, okay? So again, this is a female pelvis because it's wider, okay? It's shorter. The pubic arch is shaped like a parabola, okay, at 80 to 90 degrees. So the fourth pelvis, what do you guys think? Is this a male or a female? Female, thank you. And how do you know? Yeah, it's round at the bottom. And what else? It's wide. Good job. So you guys are absolutely correct. We know that this is a female pelvis because it is wider. Females have wider pelvises for childbearing, right? It's shorter, okay? And then there's also a shallow pelvic cavity. We have the anterior superior iliac spine. The pubic arch is 80 to 90 degrees, okay? And as you both pointed out earlier, the best way to tell is, that it's parabolic in shape. The pubic arch is parabolic in shape. For females, it's shorter and it's wider, okay? So guys, the way that you, and I'll go over this a little bit later with you guys, but the way that you can tell that it is, which one of the males and which one of the females it is even if you take like a pencil or something like that and you put it up against the femur, you're going to figure out, which one is longer, okay? Since we know that the first two skeletons are male and the last two skeletons are female, you're going to figure out which femur, guys, is longer, okay? The longer female is going to, the longer female is going to belong to Eva, right? And then the longer femur of the male is going to belong to Neil because we know that the femur is 1/4 of the total height. Okay? Does that make sense, guys? Yeah? Okay, perfect. All right, so we're going to continue to determine the sex of the skeletons. Pelvis, a female pelvis has a pubic arch angle between 80 and 90 degrees. That's the parabolic shape. And then, okay, so that's not a good way to describe it. So it's 80 to 90 degrees if you try to measure it like with respect to, using a triangle, okay? But if you just outline it with your hand like this, you'll see that it is parabolic in shape. That's what I mean, okay? And then males have a pubic arch between 60 and 70 degrees. Okay, so again, that's a lot. Narrower, okay? So again, we can tell that the first pelvis that we see here is a male pelvis. We've got a higher iliac crest, okay? We can tell because it is longer in height, okay? You have a deeper pelvic cavity right here, okay? And then you have the pubic arch that is also very narrow. So again, I think the easiest way to tell is that it is, longer with respect to height, okay? And then the pubic arch, it's shaped, it's very narrow, and a triangle can fit in there perfectly. Okay, so the second pelvis right here is a female pelvis. We can tell it's a female pelvis because it's wider, okay? It is shorter in length, okay? And the pubic arch is 80 to 90 degrees, or if you trace around this bottom area right here, it is parabolic in shape, okay? And we have an anterior iliac spine here. And the shallow pelvic cavity. Okay, so again, the first one is a male pelvis, the second one is a female pelvis. All right, so male skulls have large mastoid processes and an angular jaw. They also have more pronounced brow ridges. Females have a smaller mastoid process and more rounded jaw. The frontal bone above the eye socket is smooth. So guys, if you take a look over here at the female skull on the left, okay, so right here we have the neck muscle attachment. This right here is a less pronounced mastoid process. So guys, look very closely. This is a female skull with the less pronounced mastoid process. If you can tell, this one right here belongs to a male and it's a lot more pointed. So this part right here is called the mastoid process, okay? And the mastoid process for the female is a lot less pronounced than the male, okay? You also have for females a more pointed chin and wider angle of jaw. So again, this is a more pointed chin, okay, and a wider angle of jaw, okay? And then also females naturally have a smaller brow ridge and more vertical forehead. So remember, vertical is going up and down, okay? So again, females naturally have a smaller brow ridge and more vertical forehead, okay? Now, if we take a look at the male skull, we have a large brow ridge, okay? And we have a sloping forehead, okay? Over here, we see a developed ridge where neck muscles attach, And again, this is the more pronounced mastoid process that we talked about earlier that males have. Okay. Also, this is, a lot more, this is an acute angle. All right, do you guys see those differences? Okay, perfect. All right, guys. So for skeleton 1, okay, do you guys think this pelvis is male or female? It's male. And how do you know that? Good job. Because it is a long pelvis, okay? And because a triangle perfectly fits in here. It's very narrow, right? Okay. So we have a higher iliac crest here. We have a deeper pelvic cavity, okay? The pubic arch is 60 to 70 degrees. But just like Andy just stated, we actually have, the two easiest ways to tell that this is a male pelvis is because it is longer in height and because it's triangular at the bottom, okay? And do we think that this skull belongs to a male or a female? What do you guys think? Yeah, it's going to be a male. And the reason why we know that is because there's a large brow ridge, right? We also have a sloping forehead, okay? We have a developed ridge where neck muscles attach, okay? We have a mastoid process that's more pronounced in males than it is in females. We also have an acute angle, okay? So that's how we know that the first skeleton is a male. Oops. So for the second skeleton, do you guys think the second skeleton is a male or female? It's male. And how do we know that? Yeah, good job. We know that this is the two easiest ways to tell that it's a male pelvis is because it's, longer in height, okay? And then it's triangular at the bottom. We also have a higher iliac crest, a deeper pelvic cavity, okay? The pubic arch is approximately 60 to 70 degrees. So again, that's how we know that this is a male pelvis. Okay, and what about the skeleton? Is the skeleton male or female? Male, right? And how do we know that? Good job. We have a large brow and a sloping forehead, right? We also have a developed ridge where neck muscles attach. We have a more pronounced mastoid process, and we have an acute angle, okay? So for skeleton 3, do you guys think skeleton 3 is male or female? Good job. And how do you know that? Yeah, we know that skeleton 3 is female because it is wider. And what else? Good job. It is shorter in length, okay? And also, the pubic arch is shaped like a parabola, okay? So again, we know that this is a female pelvis because it's wider, okay? It has shorter length. The pubic arch is shaped like a parabola. Okay, we have a more shallow pelvic cavity and an anterior superior iliac spine. So we know that that is female. And then for the fourth skeleton, is this male or female? Female, good job. And we know that because, yeah, good job, Andy. So you're exactly right. We know that this is a female pelvis because it's wider, it's shorter in length, okay? We have the anterior superior iliac spine here. We have a more shallow pelvic cavity, and also the pubic arch is shaped like a parabola, okay? So now we're going to determine the race of the skeleton. So race can be determined by a number of factors. There are only 3 racial groups a given skeleton can be assigned to in the forensic world: Caucasoid white, Mongoloid Asian, Negroid black, and we're going to use the skull and its features to determine the race of each. So for the skull, we have a nasal index when it's Caucasoid, it's less than 0.48. The nasal index for a Mongoloid skull is 0.48 to 0.53. The nasal index for a Negroid skull is greater than 0.53. Okay. Also, the nasal spine of the Caucasoid is a more prominent spine. The Mongoloid nasal spine is somewhat prominent, okay, and the Negroid nasal spine is very small. The shape of the eye socket for Caucasoid is rounded, somewhat square. Mongoloid, it's round, somewhat circular. Negroid is rectangular, okay. The shape of the skull for Caucasoid is high, rounded, or square skull, okay. It's also a broad, round skull, and it's lower, narrower skull for Negroid. The teeth profile for Caucasoid is straight. For Mongoloid, it's slightly protruding, and for Negroid, the teeth profile is prominent and protruding. Okay, so the nasal spine of a Caucasoid is long and prominent with round, somewhat square eyes. Okay, the nasal spine of the Negroid skull is very short with wide rectangular eyes. So you can see from here, this is a Negroid skull. It's square, Caucasoid, circular, square. Okay, Caucasoid, again, it's circular, square. And then finally for the fourth skull, it's Caucasoid, circular, square. And I actually did post a video for you guys too in Google Classroom that helps explain this a little bit better as well. Okay, I think it's called Ancient Remains. So now we're going to determine the height of the person to calculate the estimated height based on the person's femur. First, measure the femur in centimeters. Use the scaled models to estimate height. If the subject is female, multiply the length by 2.47 and add 54.1. For a male subject, multiply by 2.32 and add 65.5. So the maximum length of female femur is 43.60 centimeters. Okay. So for skeleton 1, the femur is about 50 centimeters. It's male. Okay, so we're going to do 50 times 2.32 plus 65.5, and we're going to get 181.5 centimeters. For the second skeleton, the femur is approximately 42 centimeters. It's female. 42 times 2.47 plus 54.1 gives us about 157.84 centimeters. Skeleton 3, we have a femur that's 46 centimeters, male, which is 46 times 2.32 plus 65.5 equals 172.22 centimeters. And so finally, for the fourth skeleton, we have a femur that's 39 centimeters. So we take 39, multiply that by 2.47 plus 54.1 equals 150.43. All right, so we're going to compile data and analyze for each skeleton, complete the data fields, and compare it to the missing person report to determine which skeleton belongs to the missing person. Compare data to missing person reports on the first page. So that's pretty key. Compare it to the missing person report on the first page. So for skeleton 1, the sex is male, height is 163 centimeters, race is Caucasoid. It's Robert Downey. Okay. Skeleton 2, we've got a male. Height is 181 centimeters. The race is Negroid. Missing person is Neil Baxter. Skeleton 3, the sex is female. Height is 168 centimeters. Race is Caucasoid. And the missing person is Eva. Skeleton 4, sex is female, height is 153 centimeters. Okay, the race is Caucasoid, missing person is Sarah. So we're going to summarize how the skull can be used to determine the race and sex. Okay, and then you're going to summarize how the length of the femur can be used to determine height. So remember, the femur is used to determine height because it is approximately 1/4 of a person's total height. This is extremely helpful in forensics when a skeleton may not be present. Okay, so again, we were able to identify the 4 different skeletons by looking at the femur lengths, because the femur is 1/4 of the total height. Okay. Okay, so the age of the skull can be determined by looking at the sutures. A person who is under the age of 35 will have skull sutures that are not completely closed. So over here, this first skull, we see that the sutures are completely closed. Okay. And earlier, so we know that Eva Longoria is one of the oldest missing persons. Okay, who is age 55. So for this one, we also see that the skull sutures are completely closed. Okay.
And we know that Robert Downey is age 45. So over here, the skull sutures are not completely closed. Okay, and we know that Neil Baxter is only age 32. Okay, and then over here, we can barely see any of the sutures. Okay, and we know that Sarah is only 18 years old. And so determine which skull in the image would be most closely matched to each of the missing persons. So again, you're going to compare the age of the missing person and take into account that you know that a person who is under the age of 35 will have skull sutures that are not completely closed. Okay, so that means someone who's over 35 is going to have completely closed sutures that look like, you know, A and B, which is consistent with Eva and Robert, because Eva's 55 and Robert's 45. Okay, so for these ones, you know, we can tell this one's going to be Neil because you can kind of see some of, like, a little bit of the sutures, right? So again, under 35, it's not completely closed. You can see just a little bit of the sutures appearing, okay? And again, Neil is 32. For the last skull, we know that it's Sarah M, who's only 18, because you can't even see any of the closed sutures. It's not even visible at all. And then finally, so while bones may provide important clues about the remains, they cannot answer all the questions that a forensic scientist might have about a scene and a deceased person. What other questions might a crime scene investigator have about the remains that cannot be answered by bones alone? Well, a crime scene investigator may want to know whether there is a motive to harm the deceased person. Further, the crime scene investigator may want to know whether or not the deceased person is of mixed races to assist with reconstructing the profile of the deceased. Because if you remember, in the worksheet, it talks about the 3 different races: Caucasoid, Mongoloid, and Negroid. Those are the 3 different you know, race classifications that a forensic anthropologist can assign. And the way that they assign that is by looking at different facial features, such as the eye and the nose shape. Okay,